Hi, everyone. Welcome to the 50th episode of this show. Today's guest is Major General Richard C. Staats, retired after over 40 years of service in the U.S. Army, is led troops in combat, advised the Pentagon, and pioneered military innovation. I'm honored to welcome General Staats to the podcast. Welcome, sir.
Thank you, Danny. It's really an honor to be here. I love your podcast, and it's just great to be able to talk to you and your audience. Thanks for the chance.
Thank you for coming. Absolutely. I prepared a few questions. We might derail a little bit once we start.
That's
Uh,
fine.
yeah, but let's see. Let's start with some of the questions I prepared. So I've learned a lot about your journey, and you enlisted in the army back when you were 18, and eventually you became a two-star general with over 40 years of service. What originally inspired you to join the military, and did you ever imagine back then that you will make this your lifelong career?
Great question. And the short answer and the very disappointing answer. So I'm going to try to be extremely transparent because I think that's what you're looking for in the podcast. You know, I had no idea that I was going to spend a career in the military. I joined when I joined in the late 70s, early 80s. The military was an extremely unpopular choice as a career. So I came from a very indigent background, and I really joined the military to escape a life of abject poverty, to be honest. My idea was to do a few years, gain a trade, and then go work on a real career, right? So I ended up going to the military academy, and there's a funny story about how all that started. But when I got to the military academy, my classmates' nickname for me was Straight Arrow Stotts because they viewed me as this extremely diligent, devoted soldier. The reality was that I could not imagine anything worse than failing and having to go back to the life I was in prior to joining the military. So when we graduated, I was very fortunate. I was near the top of my class, so I got to pick my first choice for branch, which is your occupational area in the military, and I chose logistics. And it wasn't because I had this great love of logistics or some, type of, master plan or anything like that. I wanted to go into an area where I could leave as quickly as I could with a marketable skill. And, there I was, there I was 40 years later, retiring as a two-star. Nobody was more surprised than me. Well, maybe beloved Ann, my wife, but aside from beloved Ann, I was probably the most surprised person.
No, that's actually not a bad answer at all, not a disappointing one. Looking back on your career, is there a defining moment or mission that significantly shaped your perspective on leadership? For example, a challenging experience early on, perhaps during deployment or command, that taught you an important lesson that you still carry today?
Great question. I mean, great question. So I'd like to relay, if I could, three scenarios related to that. So the first one was my very, very first assignment. It was a supply and service company. It was a huge company. There was well over 300 soldiers and civilians involved with it. And remember, at this point, I had come in, and my goal was just to learn as much as I could about a trade and then leave. And in that assignment, first as a platoon leader, so in charge of about 45, 50 people, and eventually became the company commander there, I really fell in love with soldiers and with the whole idea of doing difficult missions and helping them achieve their potential. And that turned everything around. By the time I was done with that first assignment, I really, really loved soldiers and loved the Army. I want to give two other examples, though. So there I was working in the Pentagon. Let me look down at my notes here to remember dates, because as you get to my age, you forget when things happen. So I was working with the chairman, Joint Chiefs of Staff, Peter Pace. It was 2005. And he said to me, we were going to brief somebody very, very important above him. So you can kind of guess who that might be. And he said, "Hey, Doc, we're gonna go brief so-and-so in 2 weeks. Are you going to be ready?" So when the chairman, Joint Chiefs of Staff, asks you that question, what he's really saying is, be ready. We're going to go in 2 weeks. He's not really asking you your opinion. even though he's doing from a polite standpoint, it's very nice. And I said, no, sir, I'm not going to be here in 2 weeks to brief. And then he stopped doing what he's doing. He put the papers on his desk. He very calmly turns around. This is the chairman, Joint Chiefs of Staff. So he's in charge of the whole military, right? Right under the Secretary of Defense. And he said, why on earth not? You know, I mean, I'm glad he didn't have a sidearm. No, I mean, he wouldn't have shot me, but I was pretty nervous about how I was going to react. And I said, well, sir, I'm about to be deployed. I'm taking a battalion overseas. He turned to his secretary and he said, Mabel, clear my calendar for the next 45 minutes. So this is somebody who works from, 5 in the morning until 9, 10, 11 at night. Every moment of his schedule is packed. But because he saw a mid-grade officer about to head into a combat situation, the highest ranking person in our military cleared his calendar to talk to me for 45 minutes. What an amazing example of how personal leadership matters. And the lessons he taught me about taking care of military personnel in combat zones, about how to comport oneself as a senior in combat, have stuck with me through the rest of my career. And that again, I was lieutenant colonel at that point. And so that was another 15 years of time after that. The second one is a bit of a funny story. It's about my division support command commander, Colonel Rich Barnaby. And looking again, that was in 1989. So make sure I got my dates right. So the first part of the story, there was a big exercise called Operation Team Spirit, and people came from the United States and all over the Pacific Rim to participate in this exercise in Korea. And there I was. It was 2 a.m. I was out checking my soldiers. And all of a sudden, I see this just really huge soldier. He was more of a shadow because it was dark, very dark outside. There were no lights. And he said, hey, sir, how you doing? And I did a loud and thunderous hoorah. I don't know if you ever heard a military SEAL call. And I did that. And to me, it meant, I'm doing great. Good to see you out here. But he somehow thought that I was, going to launch at him and kill him or something. So he took his rifle butt and smashed me in the face and broke my nose and my upper and lower jaw, knocked all my teeth out. And these are all fakes at this point and have been for, since then. And so there I was kind of stunned. He took off. He figured, hey, this wasn't a good idea. So he took off. And then I'm walking along, and who should I see as I'm stumbling kind of half dazed back into our cantonment area with the tents and things, but Colonel Rich Barnaby, who was several levels above me. He was a brigade commander and I was company commander. And he said, oh, good to see you out here, Rich. You're exactly what I'd expect to be doing at 2 a.m, checking on your troops. And he said, how you doing? I said, not so good, sir. I'm just, there's detritus all over my face to get out any details, not gross out the listeners. Anyway, I spent the next 3 days in a dental chair, getting my jaw wired up and reconstructing everything else. I used to be good looking, before that happened. Anyway, so Colonel Barnaby wanted to court-martial this guy, who my soldiers nicknamed the Thumper. They nicknamed him the Thumper. That was his name, and they'd buy him drinks and stuff. So I said, no, I startled the guy. He didn't do it intentionally. And he says, he ran away after he did. I say, no, he's a young guy. He didn't do it on purpose. Okay, so now go fast forward in time about 4 months. I'm just coming out of a dining facility, and one of my lieutenants looks up at a mountain on the other side of Camp Casey. We were on a little base called Camp Mobile over in Korea. And at this time, we were up on the demilitarized zone over there. And he said, sir, the mountain's on fire. And I said, oh, it's just this. Oh, my word. It really is on fire. So I loaded up all my soldiers into vehicles and we headed over there because that was on the base and it was the responsibility of the Army to take care of fires and things like that. So we got over there and I had about 400 people in my unit and my company. There's a huge company. And I show up and there's the assistant division commander for support, Brigadier General Henry, and he's just chewing out this other captain. about roll around in the dirt, Captain, make it look like you're actually doing something. I said, you know what? I'm not going to go say hi to the general. So I climbed up the mountain through the creosote, and it's cold, and you're just full of all this smoky stuff, and I'm just covered in ashes by the time I got to the top. And Danny, it looked like a scene from Dante's Inferno. There were these flames licking up in the air. My soldiers were sitting around, and I saw two of my lieutenants crying on each other's shoulders. And I loved my lieutenants, and they loved me, and I mean that was all good. But my adrenal glands squeezed, and I went over and I grabbed him, and I picked him up by the scruff of the neck, and I said, "You get out there." I might have used a little more adult language than I'm using in the podcast. So I said, "You get out there, get your soldiers at double arm length interval, and start fighting that fire." And fortunately, they were more afraid of me than the fire. So they went off and they got their soldiers doing their thing. And then I turn around and I look, and here's some soldier who's completely ignored me, which made me unhappy because I was really angry at this point. So I grabbed this soldier by the scruff of the neck and I said, "Didn't you hear what I just said to those two lieutenants?" And I kicked this soldier in the butt, and he fell to the ground. And he turned around, and he's got an eagle on his hat. This was Colonel Barnaby. So he wasn't my boss. He was my boss's boss. And he turns around and he looks at me. And so he turns around, he looks at me, and I'm thinking I'm dead. And he says, "I'm moving, Rich. I'm moving." And he gets out there, and he starts fighting the fire. So we were the last two off of the mountain. We put out this fire. We saved 3 Korean villages from getting engulfed by flames. By that, we're arm in arm. And he actually took I always wear glasses. I've always had glasses. So he took his finger and he scraped a hole so I could see out through the smoke and everything. And he looked at me and he said, "That is a fantastic job. Unbelievable. We literally saved hundreds of lives through the action of your soldiers and your unit tonight." He said, "Great job." And then he said, "But if you ever assault me again, I will court-martial you." Now, I think he didn't court-martial me because of what had happened with the thumper, right? It was kind of karma. Me showing mercy and grace to that soldier, 3 months earlier, I think also led to him saying, "You know what? He didn't he didn't attack me on purpose. He didn't do those kind of things." And both of those lessons, the one from Peter Pace about taking care in the moment, giving advice to those who need it, and Rich Barnaby showing grace and mercy, even in the worst of times, are lessons that have stuck with me. And I have many, many comical stories. And that was one of the times when somebody threatened to court-martial me. That wasn't the only time. I'll just say that.
Wow. Amazing stories. It looks like the more people, the more time people spend in military, the more um, stories like that
That's
they
right. I think you're right, Danny. I think that's true.
Yeah, that's amazing, and the lessons learned are very valuable too. Thank you for sharing that. So the next topic is evolution of leadership. So as you mentioned, you rose from platoon leader to commanding general, and your leadership style has probably evolved as you took more and more responsibilities. What core leadership principles remain constant for you, whether you were leading a small unit or the entire command?
Wow, thanks for asking that question. So I was very fortunate in that I had a lot of leadership positions. I went from being a platoon leader to being a company commander. Then I had another company. I had a company in Germany, had a company in Korea. And then I came back and I was in some very significant roles in 1st Infantry Division. But I had a chance at about the 1/3 mark of my career to go back to MIT and do a PhD. And that was really a blessing. And thank you to the Army, thank you, God, to have the chance to do something amazing like that. But that allowed me to cogitate, to think, to reflect on my earlier assignments and what kinds of things were important to me. And so I came up with 3 leadership principles. And I've applied these in every military assignment since, and also in my civilian jobs. And they are the parent principle, which is be professional, be an expert in whatever your job is, big or small. Make sure you understand it. and always do what's required of you on time in the right format. Parent principle. The second principle is the Stafford principle, and the Stafford principle says be value added. Tap into your personal passions and your own creative nature and do something amazing, right? Don't just do what's asked you, do something amazing. And if we were robots, right? If we were androids or AIs, that those two rules would be enough. But we're also human beings and people. And so my final principle is the Peterson principle, which says create an environment around you where people legitimately want to work with you. Now, an interesting thing about these rules is they don't say leaders do these things. It's everybody should do these things. And the other thing to think about is think of these as being balanced, right? Like spokes on a wheel. If one of them is too long, too much emphasis, or not enough emphasis, the wheel gets out of round and it's not going to roll. It's not going to be as effective. So if your expertise is small, you can't really be creative and create a great environment. You got to work on being an expert first. On the other hand, if you're really an expert, but you're not doing a lot of creativity and you're not creating a nice environment, that wheel won't roll at all. So it's getting those things in balance. And I found that those three simple rules have been just wildly, wildly effective in getting organizations to face the right direction and do the right thing.
Honestly, you should write a book about that. Have you ever considered writing a book?
I'm supposed to write a book. I've been I've been poked many times to do it. If you've got an audience member who wants to work with me to write a book, I'll give him or her co-author credit for it. I need to do that. I've been working on a book for a while called Principled Organizations, where I would take these and I would give examples of how you actually apply them in practice. I just haven't got from here to there. And there's also an organization that's looking right now at having me do some books on gaming, on tabletop role playing, which is one of my passion areas that I've been involved with since the 70s. So I have written a lot of stuff over the years. I've written articles. A friend of mine, Harold Pascal, and I just wrote an op-ed for the LA Times. So I have done a lot of writing, but you're right. I need to write a book in this area, and I appreciate you need to keep after me until I do it.
Yeah, well, maybe I have someone in the network who may be the person, but we'll see. Hopefully hopefully you'll get it done because, these principles sound like something that I usually read in books like self-help psychology, and I think you have real practical experience that you said, as you said, it works every time. So that's definitely a good idea.
Thank you, Danny.
Okay, up to the next question. So, regarding mentorship and growth, throughout your journey, um, who were some of your key mentors and what impact did they have on you? And the second part of the question would be how you approach mentorship yourself, as you probably had an opportunity to mentor young officers or soldiers under your command.
Yeah, great question. So the two mentors who probably had the biggest impact on me were Colonel Bill Hand, who was my battalion commander in the 201st Forward Support Battalion in 1st Infantry Division as we were prepping to go to Operation Desert Shield, Desert Storm. And then Major General Dave Key, who I met as Colonel Dave Key when he was the commander of the 55th Material Management Center. And both of them kind of did the same thing. They very much encouraged me to take on tough jobs and tough duties. And when invariably I failed and didn't meet their expectations, they found ways to assign me to things and throw me in the deep end of the pool, whether I wanted to do it or not. And with me, that was a very effective technique because if you put me in a position and you make me responsible, I'm not going to like it, but I'm going to do my best job. In terms of mentoring, it's super important. I guess it's super important. And I think you can tell from our interactions that I've always been a very approachable person. We have a philosophy in the Army called open door policy. The idea is that any one of your personnel, your soldiers, civilians, if you have got Navy personnel, Air Force personnel, Coast Guard personnel, Marines, they should feel free to come into your office and talk to you about issues. And I used to drive my command sergeants major crazy who wanted to kind of be gatekeepers. I said, no, let them in. And I would usually have a stream of people coming into my office at the end of the day. And often as not, they didn't really want to talk about problems. They just wanted to chat. So why do I bring that up? Because I probably had a disproportionately large number of mentorees over the years. I've had 4 dozen or more folks that I've mentored, both in the military side, the senior civilian side, or just in civilian career in general. And what I would say is that mentoring is very important. Finding somebody that you can talk to, that you can ask salient questions about, that you can help get guidance on choices to make in your career and areas of self-development. Also, the ability of somebody to look at you and give you an unvarnished, realistic view of your capabilities and your shortfalls so you can work on them. Super important. So the first thing is it's more like a marriage than a foot race. In other words, it's important to get great chemistry between that mentoree and that mentor. And they ought to have mutual respect and mutual appreciation for each other. And that's very, very important. The second thing is that person should not be in the person's management chain or leadership chain, because you want to be able to talk to that mentor about a variety of things, about the organization, about your career aspirations, about things you have questions about your failings. And that's the way you really get value out of that relationship. But I have mentored a lot of people over the years. Some of them went from, captains to 2-star generals. I had senior civilians that I was a mentor for that ended up being extremely high-level people in the government, what they call level 3 SESs. I've been very, very fortunate in that I've worked with some great people and had a chance to influence them at critical points in their career and get them to do the things they want to do. And I've always been a believer that everything ends, right? Your military career eventually comes to an end, civilian career comes to an end. You stop being in senior positions eventually in all organizations. I mean, my favorite book has one of the books in it is called Ecclesiastes. It says, there's a season for everything. And so one of the things is that when I was mentoring military people, I didn't insist that they have a military career. If they were doing what they were doing and they were unhappy, or if they had opportunities to do something else, I would encourage them to go do that, and I would help them be successful in that transition. So a good mentor is more interested in your personal success as a person than in you fulfilling some role in the organization.
Thank you a lot for this advice and stories. Definitely super valuable. I had several mentors in my, I'm just 23 years old, but I have worked on 3 different startups, my career, a lot of different things, and a few people have had a huge impact on me. So mentorship can be very helpful for individuals. Um, Thank you for sharing that. Um, Another question is maybe a little bit more personal. It's about transitioning to civilian life after your long career in the military. So how was it? What were the challenges you faced in adjusting to life outside the uniform, and in what ways you still contribute to um, your purpose after you retired from the military?
Yeah, that's a great heartfelt question, and I'm delighted to answer it. I think the first thing is go back to my previous answer that life has seasons, right? So I was a single dad for 13 years. I ended up raising our 3 eldest, Kathy, Liz, and Ben, as a single dad. And I remember parents around me would say, "Rich, when those kids leave the house, you're going to be heartbroken. What are you going to do? You're such a devoted dad. You're so interested in them." And I said, "I think I'll be okay." And they were like, "No, no, I've seen this before. You're going to be heartbroken." And the kids, yay, verily, they left the house, and I was okay. And it's not because I don't love my kids. I do love them, but my goal was to have creative, self-motivated kids who are productive members of society, and I'm so proud of the people that they've become and the work that they're doing now. Kathy's a medical doc, married to a medical doc. She's got our 2 grandsons. We've got my son Ben, who went in the Marine Corps, created a company, sold the company, created another company, sold the other company, and now is working on a 3rd company and raising show bunnies for fun. And his twin sister Liz went into culinary arts, and she's a chef over in Chicago now. And again, I'm super proud of the kids and the great job they've done. It's not that I don't miss them, but that was a season of my life. Military is the same way. I always knew at some point my military career was going to come to an end. So first thing is, I never internalized my rank as who I was. I never did. In fact, I used to drive, as a very senior person, I used to drive my staff crazy because I would rather drive myself and grab my own bags and have somebody, doing it for me. I'd rather arrange my own travel if I was allowed to, rather than have somebody else do it. I always flew on the cheapest airplane seats to try to save money for the government. And so for me, when the time came to retire, it was just a natural thing. And it was no great loss of my, personal view, my personal utility, or my personal worth. I just moved on and I did something else. Of course, I still had mentorees. I still had people that would ask me questions. In fact, there were more people who wanted to ask my advice and opinion after I retired because I was now a safer person to talk to in some ways. But then, as you said, Danny, I moved on into other areas. So I do executive consulting for startups now. I do volunteer work on suicide prevention. I sit on several boards where I'm giving advice to people about how to bring meaningful technologies and capabilities to make the world a better place. I think of 2 of them, Rev. So Rachel, who's the CEO of Rev, they're trying to decrease suicides through increasing connectivity between people and organizations. And there's ImmerOpEx, which is Jim Deere is running, where it's full body immersion in virtual reality that allows them to tackle amazingly tough problems like school shootings, bomb disposals, all these kind of things, which you couldn't do if you didn't have that amazing technology. And then I'm working with another company called Maveneer, and Chad is in charge of that. Chad's a great guy. And it's one of the fastest growing companies in the United States. And they work on distribution centers and logistics. And they've got about 30-ish people, 30, 35 people. And they're all just amazing and brilliant and work great together. And by giving advice and giving hints and doing fun things for them, I'm still able to contribute, and it's a tremendous amount of fun. I also do. I talked about gaming earlier. If any of your listeners out there go to big game conventions like Origins or Gen Con, they ought to stop by and say hi, because I usually do something with that. So I have been able to keep up with my passions and my hobbies as well. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's amazing to see you have this like multi-dimensional personality where on one side you're a very disciplined soldier who raced through the ranks and been through combat and all of the other situations, but at the same time you preserved your uh, part of yourself that likes music, gaming, and other amazing things for sure.
Thank you, Danny.
All right. Well, my final question would be on lessons for the next generation. Reflecting on your extensive journey, what advice would you give to young men and women in the military or those just starting their careers? Um, are there any key lessons or principles you'd like the listeners to take away from your experience?
Yeah. So in no particular order, I would say, so the first thing is, remember the parent principle is be an expert, do the best job you can at whatever you're doing. The parent principle, when you come out and you're a private, or if you're, let's say you've got an associate's degree and you become a specialist, just try to learn your military occupational specialty to the best of your ability and just be the best soldier, Marine, Air Force person, Coast Guard, sailor, whatever branch you're in, civilian, just do the best job you can to learn your position and to be professional. So that's the first thing. Whatever you're doing, do the best you can at it. Colin Powell wrote a great book called It Worked for Me. And I had a chance to listen to the audio version of that where he actually read it himself. And I knew Colin Powell because he lived very close to me when the kids and I lived in McLean, Virginia. And I used to see him all the time in the local hardware store. And but he was always in civilian clothes, right? I mean, he had a nice short military haircut and everything. He was just a great guy. And one day I walked up to him, and I would always say, "Hi, sir, how you doing?" But I would refer to anybody who was older than me as sir, right? So I said, "Hey, sir, I know you're in here a lot. Do you know where, such and such is?" And he pointed the bro, and he says, "Wait." And I think I was in uniform. I might have been a captain at the time. And he said, "You don't know who I am, do you?" And I looked at him, and it's like, "No, sir, I don't." And he says, I'm your chairman, Joint Chiefs of Staff. I'm Colin Powell." And I was ready. It was another one of those moments where I was ready to melt. Anyway, he and we kept on intersecting as time went on and after he retired and everything else. But so that book was special to me because I actually knew him. But he talked about that. He said, it doesn't matter if you're a lineman on telephone lines. It doesn't matter if you're a garbage truck operator, whether you're a general in the army. Whatever job you have, do the best job you can. The Romans actually evaluated their legionnaires in 3 areas. I don't know if you knew that or not. It was ferocity in combat, kind of courage, military knowledge, tactics and how to set up camps and do logistics. And the final one I find the most interesting, which is favor of the gods, which if you think about it is all about luck and innovation. Why do I bring that up? I think that people shouldn't focus from early on. The military career is going to end at some point. Don't focus on your rank. Don't focus on making the next rank. Be a professional. Do a good job. If you do a good job and the need's there and you're lucky, you'll get promoted, especially when you get to the higher level. I don't know how many officers I ran into or senior enlisted over the years who absolutely thought that they were deserving of a promotion to the next rank and were very upset when they didn't get selected. Listen, it's pure luck. I've sat on those senior boards. You could have a good day or bad day, depends who sit on the board and what they see and the discussions that they have. It's all luck. I mean, I'm telling you, especially at the general officer level, it's 99% luck getting promoted to brigadier general, major general. And I ended my career in the reserve, so the top rank I could have held was 2 stars. Actually, I made the final rank, and I was, again, nobody was more, well, beloved Anne was maybe, my wife was maybe more surprised, but nobody was as surprised as I was to get promoted. And again, I know from experience and from having been on the selection side of things that it's a lot of luck. So just focus on being the best you can. Don't focus on the rank. Don't internalize your rank and make that part of who you are, because eventually you're going to leave. And I'd rather have you leave in a happy and remember all the good things. And as you were saying, Danny, all the great stories, which there's a million stories if you are for a while in, especially if you do combat or something. I guess the other thing is, so we talked about my principles, the Perrin, the Stafford, and the Peterson principles. Early on in your career, you should come up with your leadership principles. What are those simple rules that you're going to apply to all your leadership roles in the military, out of the military, in civilian service, in business, whatever it is? And again, I was very fortunate that I have kind of a chance to pause and reflect. And then I have applied those principles ever since to good effect. But I think everybody needs to take the time to reflect and develop their own set of principles. Also, find a mentor. Find a mentor, whether they're in your particular career field or outside of it. Find somebody you can talk to about what's important to you and how your life needs to progress and whether you're on the right path, and can give you some really good, constructive, unvarnished feedback on things you need to improve about yourself and work on. By the by, if your listeners send me an email, the chance that I'm going to respond favorably is very positive. So, Danny, thank you so much for the opportunity to talk with you tonight and to be part of what I think is a really professional podcast. I'm very proud of the fact that you invited me, and it was a great opportunity. And thank you so much. And God bless your audience, and God bless America.
Thank you, sir. Same here. God bless you. And I am grateful to have you on my anniversary 50th podcast episode. It was great.
Excellent.